We are recording the interview of Michael E. Jackson. This interview is being conducted by Adrian Hill from the Wright State University Veteran Voices Project. The interview is being recorded at the home of Michael E. Jackson in Tipp City, Ohio. It is 4 p.m. on July 29, 2014. Alright, we'll start with some biographical information. When and where were you born?
I was born in Troy, Ohio on the 8th of September 1946, but I don't look that old.
Alright.
Or do I? Don't tell me, I don't want to
know. Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My dad was Edmund F. Jackson, and my mom is Winifred L. Jackson, and actually they both worked at the base at one point or another. My dad had been a gunner in B-24s, and so I probably got a little bit of the Air Force fever from him. He had been shot down. He'd been shot twice, shot down in a B-24, missing in action for 33 days, and that intrigued me. And then he went to work civil service out at the base, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And my mom had worked also at the base, so we come from a long line of Wright-Patterson workers.
Okay. And you said your father, he was in the military? What?
He was in World War II.
World War II. Okay.
He's actually one of those greatest generation guys that quit high school, joined the military, and then when he got back from World War II, then he finished high school at Patterson Co-op in Dayton and went to work in civil service.
Okay. All right. Did you have any siblings?
I've got a bunch. There's 5 of us kids, three boys and 1 girl besides me.
Okay. Did any of them serve in the military?
All of my brothers but 1 were in the Air Force.
Okay. And did they have long careers or?
No, they were in for 1 term and out.
Officers or enlisted?
Enlisted.
Enlisted. Okay. Yeah. All right. What were you doing before you entered the service?
I was in college at Ohio University, and when I graduated, I turned down a teaching job to go in the Air Force as a pilot, I hoped. And so I turned down a draft deferment to go in during Vietnam, which is pretty much what everybody didn't want to do, but I did it because I just seemed like the thing to do at the time. Seemed patriotic.
Yeah. All right. And what branch of the military did you serve?
Air Force.
Air Force. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you, so you went through school and then you did OCS?
No.
Then, or
well,
what was the program you had for you?
It's kind of like that. In Air Force, we call it Officer Training School. I went through Ohio University 4 years, graduated with a bachelor's degree in education, and then went into the Air Force initially went to OTS, Officer Training School, and then 53 weeks of pilot training, and then off into the Air Force as a pilot.
Okay. So, when you left for your training, you went straight to the officer training school?
Right.
Okay. Do you remember what that feeling was like, or?
Yeah.
On that?
Yeah. I came from Tipp City, little teeny Tipp City, Ohio, and other than a year and a half, I'd lived here all my life. I was a 4th generation person. I'd been pretty much in a place where everybody knew everybody all my life, and went off to officers training school where they started yelling at me for no apparent reason at all, and they seemed to enjoy it a lot. But I, having been raised by my parents who were very organized and not strict, I got away with murder, but I didn't mind it at all. I thought, I always hung my shirts up all facing the same direction. My pants were always hung up, and my stuff was always closed in a drawer. So it wasn't really too bad. It was just a change of pace.
Yeah. Okay. Do you recall any of your instructors specifically?
In officer training school?
Just in general, or any of your mentors along the way?
Remember them in pilot training when I was in undergraduate pilot training. I remember my instructors, but other than what we called an FTO, flight training officer, and officer training school, I really don't remember any of them. Which is funny because I ended up going back as a FTO and then a squadron commander and a group commander at OTS as a major lieutenant colonel, and I became one of them, and I don't know if anybody remembered me after I left or not, but that's kind of interesting that it's all a circle. I ended up doing the things that I had gone through as a student as an instructor.
Mm-hmm. Was there a reason you remembered the ones that you did remember?
Well, the only one I remember from officer training school was the one we had every day. He was our flight training officer. He was in charge of our flight. So we were with him every day. And in pilot training, you know, it's kind of a baptism by fire thing. It's the hardest thing I ever did in my life. College, high school, college, I never really tried. I just kind of floated through. Pilot training was hard. And I remember the instructors because one of them was particularly bad, and the other ones got me through. So you bond with them. It's a, like I say, it's kind of an ordeal. So you tend to have a bonding influence with those guys. And I ended up being an instructor pilot then later on, and hopefully my students felt the same way about me that I did about mine.
All right. Now let's see. Did you receive any specialized training when you were in the Air Force?
A lot. As a pilot, I went through, let's see, I flew T-41s, T-37s, T-38s, AT-33s, O-2s, and B-52s, so you had to go through training in each one of those. And then, for example, in B-52s, there was a whole bunch of training that went with that, nuclear weapons schools and things, and delivery schools. Had to go through instrument fighter pilot school to fly the AT-33 so I could support U.S. troops in Vietnam, which was a requirement. I went through water survival, jungle survival, went through survival in 6 foot of snow up in Fairchild Air Force Base. So a lot of training all through the Air Force. I think probably if you added it up, I spent half my time in training and half the time actually doing my job.
Which one of those trainings did you think you feel was the most rigorous?
Oh, the pilot training.
Training.
Hardest thing I ever did in my life, before or after. To this day, hardest thing I ever did. I'd never been in an airplane other than an airliner once or twice. And I had never flown anything, and all of a sudden you're thrown into this thing. And I know this as an instructor now, is that you're always asking them to do 1 or 2 things beyond what they can really do. So it's a time of total stress and total commitment, and if you don't work at it, you're gone. About, I don't know what percentage of our pilot training class was thrown out of the program. But at that point during Vietnam, they weren't really screening you too well before you went in. When I was an instructor, they screened people pretty well before they accept them into the program. I went in during a war, and they needed pilots, and they needed them fast and now, so there wasn't the screening that went on. And I always said that I would never have been able to get in now under the standards they have now versus that. So I went in not knowing a thing about an airplane, and I spent the first couple of flights going, hey, this is pretty cool, we're up in the air, instead of listening to the instructor. And so I just kept falling farther and farther behind, so it was a real struggle to catch back up.
Which you did so successfully, you think?
Actually I did ended up doing pretty well after a while. It was painful for a while, but I caught on.
How long was that class?
53 weeks.
53 weeks? Okay. That's a long time, almost a year. Now, did you have a hard time adapting to the military lifestyle, do you think, going from college to that, or was it pretty
Not, like I said, going to officer training school, it was different, but it wasn't anything traumatic. It was okay. I actually ended up on the wing staff, so I was one of the top 8 people in all of hundreds of officer trainees. So I did pretty well at that. Pilot training, like I said, that was extremely hard, very hard. I didn't think I was going to make it through at one point, and I actually, my mom kind of smacked me on the phone and said, "Don't give up," and so I didn't, and I ended up doing okay.
And that is what you think helped you to get through it? Was your mom?
I think the best advice I ever got from anybody was from my mom, and she said, "You're not paid to decide how well you're doing. That's their job. So don't try to outguess them. Just do it, and they'll tell you if you're not doing it." And so I did. I went back and I just thought, kind of took the pressure off. You know, I kind of went back and I went, okay, if they don't want me here, they can tell me. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep on going. And I did, and I did okay. And things got better. You know, you start catching up with things.
Okay. All right. We're going to go kind of transition to wartime service now. Where did you serve?
Well, I ended up serving. I was in Vietnam. I went there in June the 25th of 1971 and came home June the 25th of 1972, which happened to be a leap year, so I got an extra day out of it, which I wasn't too pleased with. But went into Cameron Bay after we'd gone to jungle survival. All the air crews went through jungle survival in the Philippines. And went to Cameron Bay, and then from there, I knew, having been a forward air controller in the States before I went to Vietnam, I knew one place I didn't want to go, and of course I ended up there, the one place I knew of that I didn't want to go to. So I went to Da Nang, and then that squadron, the 20th Tactical Air Support Squadron, had units out with different Army units, South Vietnamese and American. And I ended up with a 1st Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division at a place called Camp Eagle, which was an Army camp, which they don't live like Air Force guys do. It wasn't nearly as nice as the Air Force bases were, but it was a good job. I mean, we really got to see a lot of action, and other than the living conditions, life was good. And then from there, I went to Hue Phu Bai, which is just south of Hue City in Da Nang, or in Vietnam. All of this is I Corps. We were always the furthest north.
What is I Corps?
I Corps, Vietnam is divided into 4 corps, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 1 I Corps. They called it I.
Oh, okay.
Instead of, it could have been 1 corps, but that's not as cool as I Corps, so it was I Corps. Was basically from a little south of Da Nang up into the DMZ, so I was always in the northernmost troops that were in Vietnam, which was interesting in itself. But I moved from Da Nang to Hue Phu Bai, which is south of Hue. If you've heard of Tet, you've heard of Hue. And then from there, I moved to Da Nang for the last 5 months I was over there, of the 12 months.
Okay. Now, were you there during the Tet Offensive?
No, that was in '68.
Okay. All right. Now, do you have any memorable experiences that from overseas you'd like to share?
From Vietnam? I got a lot of memorable experiences. I was, well, number one, you know, I like to think I saved more lives than I took. Not sure that's true, but I like to tell myself that. Our job was when the ground troops got in trouble, where they would call in a forward air controller. This is in the days before a drone. And we would go in and separate the good guys from the bad guys, you know, scout it out and figure out who was where and what, and then we would direct the fighters in on their bomb runs and strafing runs and things like that, because the fighters, basically the Air Force had gone almost to an all-jet Air Force, and we're in a guerrilla war, and you've got a jet that is really good at burning fuel, and that's about it, and going fast, and what you needed was something that could go low and slow and quiet, and see where everybody was, separate out the good guys from the bad guys, and then we would direct the fighters in, because they were going so fast and so high they really couldn't see much of anything. And what we do is roll in and shoot a smoke rocket at the ground, and then make corrections off of that so that the fighters weren't dropping on the good guys. And we had to clear every bomb run. We had to line up. That's why we had to go to fighter pilot school, was so we could pretty much tell where the fighter was going to drop its bombs as it was rolling in on it. And if it was going to hit the friendlies, we'd call them off high and dry. If they were cleared to drop the bombs, we'd say cleared hot. And the problem with that is that under the rules of engagement, which I could talk about for days and actually have, which basically were rules that were put into place to keep us from winning, if there was not a FAC on station to direct the airstrike, there couldn't be an airstrike. So once the airstrike started, the first thing that the enemy would do is shoot at the FAC. Now we're going 110 miles an hour at 1,000, 2,000 feet, so we're fairly easy targets as opposed to a fighter that's at 20,000 feet and going at, 500 knots. But if we got shot down, they had to wait for another FAC to come out there droning along at 110 miles an hour to take our place for the airstrike could start. So we became the target of the enemy once the airstrike started. It's an interesting job.
So that was your job, was you guys kind of planned out the routes for the jets to drop?
We separated, we figured out where all the good guys were, where all the bad guys were, then figured out what the best heading to bring the fighters in, and then brought the fighters in, made sure that they were lined up on the bad guys, and didn't do what we call now friendly fire. on the good guys. What we called it then was a short round, or a short round would be a bomb that would go off among the friendlies. That was our job, to keep that from happening. Our job was find targets, and then to make sure that if there were U.S. troops or any troops, South Vietnamese troops, that none of the friendlies got hurt.
Okay. Now, did you you said you received a Purple Heart. What was that for?
Well, it was an accident. I actually took a rocket in the air, which knocked me out of the air, but I recovered it probably about the height of one of those tall trees out there. So it didn't hurt me. And then walking out of the BOQ one night, a rocket went off basically right in front of me and threw me across the building and kind of banged me up a little bit.
So that was just an incoming rocket from the enemy then on your base?
Yeah, you'd think you would hear it coming, but I didn't.
No.
You know, just basically I walked right into it.
Okay. Now, did you get knocked out from that, or?
I did.
You did. Okay. So where did you wake up then?
Upside down on the floor.
Okay. And was there anybody else there with you, or was it just
Yeah,
you?
yeah. Well, there was nobody that got hit. My boss's hooch, and I wrote a book that's in there. My boss's hooch got leveled. It luckily hit in the front of the hooch, and everybody was in the back. And these are concrete hooches, but it blew it apart. All I got was, luckily all the shrapnel went by me. And I ended up, the impact of it kind of blew me across the room, and I ended up upside down with my neck on the floor and my feet up against the corner of a wall, and it cracked a bunch of stuff loose in my back.
Okay. So you had a pretty good back injury from that?
I did, but being stupid, I didn't really tell many people about it. I got some people to cover for me for a couple weeks, or a couple flights, and then I started flying again, which in the long term kind of screwed me up. But when you're young, you don't think about that stuff.
Right. How far into the deployment were you when that happened?
I think I was in April, and I left in June. So it was during, you asked if I was there during Tet. There's two big things that everybody remembers. One's Tet, and the other one is what's called the Easter Offensive, or the Spring Offensive.
Yep.
I was there for the Spring Offensive, and that's when they were basically coming across the DMZ and just wiping out everything. That's why we moved back. We were kind of getting forced back from Camp Eagle had already stood down, but Hue Phu Bai was in danger of being overrun, so we moved back and went to Da Nang, kind of moving south. And actually the biggest airstrike I had while I was over there was blowing up our own stuff.
Really? To keep it out of their hands?
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities between what's going on in Iraq right now and Vietnam. A lot of similarities, unfortunately, and none of them any good. But we used to pull duty officer at Quang Tri, which is right on the DMZ. It's about as far north as we were, and that was only with advisors that were advising the South Vietnamese. Well, once the Spring Offensive started, the South Vietnamese took off and left all of this equipment that the U.S. government had given them. Tanks, bombs, not bombs, but helicopters and a bunch of other stuff that was up there. They had just left it. So I had been the duty officer up there 2 weeks before that, so I kind of knew where everything was. So I was one of the first guys that went up there, and we directed our airstrikes in on our stuff, just to blow it up, to keep it from becoming North Vietnamese property.
Would they have gotten it if otherwise?
They got it anyways.
Oh, even after they blew it up?
Well, they had already taken, by the time we got up there, they had already taken some of it. And I have never seen it, but I've heard that they were using our tanks against us, which
Really?
I don't know. That could be just hearsay, but I'm sure that they took the food, and I'm sure they took, the rifles and everything else that was up there.
Yeah. Okay. Was that your only combat that you encountered? Was the rocket when you were over there?
The only injury?
Well, no, just combat in general. I mean, did you
We
ever
got
have any-
shot at every flight.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's how you knew where the targets were sometimes. You'd get shot at.
Shot at with?
Everything from bows and arrows, not really, probably AK-47s to, they started at the end, they were using particularly, I took an SA-2, which is unbelievable. It's just totally stupid. Those things cost millions of dollars. I'm flying an O2, which cost at the most $100,000. And I remember when I took it, I had 4 Navy A4s above me. That's when I went out of control. And the concussion of it knocked me down. And the A4s were yelling, "Factory okay, factory okay." And at the time when I came back, and I've got a picture of me holding my finger on a map where the thing was fired at, and I just turned the A4s loose on it and got out because I thought I had damaged the airplane. But that thing probably cost $2-3 million. The airplane that I was flying was 100 million or 100,000, and I remember telling the intelligence officer when I debriefed it, I said, if they had just given me the $2 or $3 million, I'd have blown the airplane up myself, paid you guys, and kept the change. Didn't particularly care for that, but that's part of my charm.
You said you passed out during a flight. Is that what you said?
No, I got knocked. Basically, I was knocked out of control. The concussion from the SA2, and I had a guy explain this to me once. That my boss was a Major Art Evans, who is now Dr. Art Evans, who teaches physics, and he explained to me how that thing was able to go off and not really damage the airplane, other than the concussion of it knocking me downwards. And it's basically an air pressure kind of thing where it just kind of blew the airplane away, while all of the shrapnel and everything went upwards. The concussion kind of knocked me down. So I'm not sure they're really shooting at me or if they're shooting at the A4s, but I took the brunt of it, and they saw it, and they were able to, in fact, as I was leaving, I cleared them in hot, which may or may not have been against the rules, but it was in the DMZ, so it really didn't make any difference. And they actually, from what I understand, knocked out the SAM site. But that was as they were starting to move south. They were bringing all of that equipment, which we had never seen before, south. We had never seen SA2s up until, I'm guessing, maybe March, April. SA2 are the shoulder-held missiles, and they were just wiping facts out like crazy, because and it went for the front engine, because the front engine on a forward air control or O2, we had a propeller in the front and a propeller in the back. The engine in front, as I understand it, ran hotter than the engine in back. I'm not really sure how or why that is, other than airflow and things like that. But it would knock the front end of the engine off. We had a guy named Bill Jankowski that had the whole front of his airplane knocked out, and he had to bail out of the airplane. His feet were hanging out the front of the airplane, and they finally got him out. They rescued him, but he was a forward air controller, and I think he was one of the first guys that took an SA2, at least in our squadron. So it became a rather... We went from, when I first went over there wasn't any of that stuff. We had to worry about 50 calibers and, bigger guns like that. But there wasn't the big rocketry that there was towards the end, anti-aircraft rockets and things like that. But as they started moving them south, the threat got bigger. As a matter of fact, during the rescue of Bat 21, they pulled SO2s out because all of that stuff was just knocking us down, and they brought in OV-10s. And I'm not even sure if later on they didn't bring in F4s as fast facts to get those guys out of there, because we didn't have any counter raw gear, radar warning gear at all. We just had some radios, was about all we had. We didn't even have ejection seats.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you guys were doing your missions, you'd take off, you'd go, and you were looking for spots to hit and trying to separate the enemy from friendly zones?
We had regular, they called them AOs, area of operations, and we would take off, and we had about 5 hours of fuel. That's the thing I was saying. The jets, they burn gas just like that. We could go for 4 or 5 hours, and we would go out and we would basically troll around, see if anybody would shoot at us. We'd look for trails. We'd look for supplies. We were flying so low, and we also carried binoculars, that we could tell by footprints whether people were coming in or out of streams. If the footprint was wet on one side, you knew if it had water in it, you knew they were coming out, so you could kind of track people. Really? And the area that we flew in, the Ashaw Valley and the DMZ, had been bombed so much that a lot of it was just wide open. It looked like the face of the moon. I've got some pictures on here if you want to see it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just totally devoid of anything. It was just totally pockmarked. So you could see the trails and things like that. But the North Vietnamese they were pretty sharp, and they were a lot more dedicated than our side probably was. By that I mean the South Vietnamese, not the Americans. In that no matter what we did to them, they came back. You know, we dropped bombs that were had metallic sensors in the fuses, and they'd strip naked. They'd have somebody, I'm sure he wasn't a volunteer, pull a hood of a truck through this area, because they could see how many bombs fell. They knew they were either time delayed or magnetic fuses, and they'd pull a truck hood, you know, 100 yards behind them and set those things off. You know, it probably wasn't the kind of job they gave to their leaders. It's probably somebody had screwed up and they said, your day is, you're going to be pulling the rope today. Or if time delayed fuses, we dropped on a thing called Tiger Mountain all the time, and they would know that, you know, we dropped 10 bombs and none of them went off, so they know they're time delayed probably, so they just set it out until they counted 10 that had exploded, and then they'd go back to it again. Pretty clever little people.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. So, I mean, besides, when you got hit by the rocket, did you know, I mean, do you have any recollection of remembering that it was coming, remembering like No?
No, I didn't. I walked to the door, and the next thing I knew, I was laying on the floor upside down. I didn't have any clue. Didn't hear a thing, didn't see a thing. All I knew was there were people yelling, and that the hooch in front of me was on fire, and I knew that I didn't feel particularly good. I thought I'd broken my jaw and some other stuff. So.
And what was that like, knowing that, you know, I mean, at first you know you wake up and you don't know what's going on. I mean,
you feel pretty lucky, actually.
Really?
Because, you know, I don't know if you were in the Army, have you ever been in a artillery barrage or anything like that?
IEDs. But
you just kind of lay there, like when we were getting rocketed. You just kind of lay there under your bed just going, you know, if it hits above me, it's over. And you're just kind of going, no, 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 no. And then you can hear them walking in and walking out with the rockets. In this case, I didn't hear a thing. I didn't see a thing. I just knew that one minute I was walking out the door, the next minute there wasn't a door. And I was pretty lucky. I really was.
The initial feeling for you was just you felt lucky?
Not at the time. Initial feeling was, ow.
Yeah.
That hurts.
Yeah.
But, you know, when I think about what could have happened, things like that, it's okay. Yeah, it's all right. Everything works out okay in the end.
Yeah. Okay. Did you ever see, I mean, you guys were dropping a lot of bombs, or you were helping set up for that. I mean, did that affect you in any way, seeing the destruction, seeing any of that? I mean,
the first, and here again, I'll give you a copy of this book to take with you. The first person that you knew you killed, even if I hadn't fired the shot, although I did fire the shot, I hit him with a rocket. I felt terrible. I'm just a little Catholic altar boy from Tip City. I've never hurt anybody intentionally other than just smack them on the back of the head or hit them on the shoulder. And to know that you killed somebody, I mean, but that night we got rocketed, which was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. And it kind of put everything into focus. That, hey, they're trying to kill me, I can't feel too bad about that. And it's like anything else, and this isn't anything to brag about, but after a while it just became a matter of keeping score. I mean, you feel bad like today, but back then didn't feel too bad. It was what you had to do to stay alive. It was either them or me. If we didn't stop them out there, they were going to be at Da Nang. You know, we're blowing up people carrying rockets through the jungle, and if we didn't, they're at Da Nang or Camp Eagle or Wei Fu Bai shooting rockets at us. So you got to put the big picture into motion and forget about the whole church thing that you learned as a kid. It's different when people are shooting at you.
Okay. What kind of anything else you wanted to add about your combat experiences or anything like that? Any memorable?
No, I sure wouldn't want to do it again, but I think it does it's not the worst thing that ever happened to me. The reaction of the people back home, which led to our Operation Welcome Home celebrations that I was the national chair for. The public let us down. Older veterans let us down. Politicians let us down. But at the time, you're not concerned about that. You're just trying to keep each other alive. It's, you know, you're trying to keep your buddies safe. And it isn't until you get home that you see just how bad things were as far as the way the public was perceiving what was going on and the support you got from other veterans and from politicians.
Now you're talking about your, you know, you're worried about, you know, keeping everybody else alive. Could you touch a little bit more on your camaraderie and the friendships you made on your deployment?
Yeah, I've got friends that I made in Vietnam that are good friends today. Matter of fact, got a guy on Facebook. Today was his birthday, and he was my roommate in Vietnam, and we're good buddies to this day, 40-some years later. So yeah, it's a real bonding experience. It's unless you've been shot at with somebody, you just don't understand. There's a saying I remember watching in Band of Brothers, is that someone who spills blood with me will be my brother forever. So yeah, that's true. It really is.
Okay. Now, while you were serving, was there any way you stayed in touch with your family or friends back home?
Yeah, and that was problematic. You know, today we have emails and texts and what do they call that? What do you do?
Skype.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. Back then we had the post office, and we had free mail from Vietnam to the States. You just write free where the stamp goes, and it would go free, and you got just what you paid for. It might take 2 weeks for a letter to get home, and in the meantime they don't know what's going on. They got it worse than we do, because at least we know we're okay.
We're back from a short break recording the interview of Michael E. Jackson. Alright, Mike, what did you guys do for recreation on your off time while you were in Vietnam?
Not much. I lived with the Army, and we really didn't have a whole heck of a lot of anything to do. There was an officers club, but I didn't drink, especially while I was in Vietnam. I didn't drink anything. And they had a foosball table. So this guy was telling you about that had his birthday today. He and I would go play foosball in the officers club, which is basically a plywood shack with sandbags around it. And at Way Phu Bai, the only thing I can think that was an improvement there was we had concrete showers like you'd have at a campgrounds. And now at Da Nang they did have a movie theater and that sort of thing, and they had a BX, which we didn't have really to speak of at Camp Eagle or Way Phu Bai. We had a little kind of shanty that they had some stuff in, but nothing really to buy. So really there wasn't a whole lot of recreational activities. I read more books that year than I think I've ever read in my life, and wrote letters and we flew sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, so we didn't have a whole lot of time, and usually we were so tired from flying. I mean, it really wore you out, you know, because you're kind of tense, and it was tiring. So it was okay. It was, you know, as far as activities go, they did have a photo lab at Camp Eagle in a trailer, and they would let us use the photo lab when we had a chance. So I did learn how to develop black and white pictures. That's my only claim to fame from Vietnam.
Alrighty. So when you came home from Vietnam, you did exactly a year over there then?
I did 366 days.
It's just a leap year.
Yeah.
366 days. Now where did you fly into after Vietnam?
I flew back to Travis Air Force Base on what we called the Freedom Bird. You know, a bunch of guys from Vietnam. And went to San Francisco International, which is where I got my introduction to the peace movement in the United States and just what they thought of us having gone off and served our country, which later on in my later years I would turn into Operation Welcome Home to welcome home the guys that didn't get a welcome home.
Can you describe that?
Yeah.
Coming.
It was the people, and to this day, I like to think they were misguided and not just malicious.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't believe in the war. Okay, nobody does. I mean, nobody wants a war, especially the guys that have got to go and get shot at and live in the dirt and separated from their families. So the peace movement, who thought they had a corner on peace, welcomed us home by spitting on us and screaming, "How many babies did you kill?" And just, hitting people. I saw somebody get hit with a sign. And to this day, there are people that say that didn't happen, but I'm here to tell you that it did happen. And that's the reason 10 years, well, not 10 years later, in that was in 1972. In 2004, we started planning the first national Operation Welcome Home, which we can get to later if you want to. Mm-hmm. But, the population, particularly younger people, were against the war, so they took it out on the GIs who had no vote at all. I mean, take it out on the politicians. They're the guys that vote to put this over there. Don't take it out on the GIs. We're willing to give our lives to whatever the country directs us to, but we don't get a say on where we go. Even the politicians, in their attempt to save face and get reelected, they turned on the GIs. World War II veterans turned on GIs. I remember going to the American Legion, and basically they didn't want anything to do with Vietnam veterans. So that led to the saying, I'm sure you've heard over years, that never again will one generation of GIs lose faith with the others. So it was just a bad time. It was a bad time for the country. It's probably the closest, I think, that we've come to civil war since the Civil War. I mean, the country was just, we had presidents resigning, we had vice presidents resigning, we had bombings in the Capitol. I mean, it was just a bad time. So that's what we came home to. Thanks for your job. Now we're not going to hire you for anything. There were signs on doors that said no GIs or dogs allowed of restaurants and things like that. So that's what we came back to.
Was that shocking to you to come home to that? Did you expect that?
I knew what was coming because I'd been in college in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't graduate until 68, and I had seen it coming. But I had never experienced it personally, and it was very upsetting. Mm-hmm. To this day, it just really makes me mad and depressed at the same time.
Okay.
We didn't do anything wrong. We did what we were supposed to do. We saved each other's lives. We didn't go out there to see how many people we could kill. And we didn't want to be there to start with. Don't take it out on us. So that's why I'm glad, as a result of some things we've done and just the population in general, seeing what the GIs are going through, particularly, I think one of the best things that happened in Iraq and Afghanistan is that the National Guard got called up. And as a result, people got to see in their own family what's happening. They didn't want to go. But when you've got a military that's kind of isolated from the civilian community, people don't realize that. But when it's your brother or somebody that you're in college with, my daughter was at High University. There was a guy in her dorm that got deployed 3 times. Took him, I forget how many years to graduate, but it's like 7 years because he kept getting redeployed. And people see that, and they have an appreciation for what the military is going through, which they didn't see in Vietnam. In Vietnam, it was, how do we get out of it? We're going to Canada. We're going to poke our eardrums out with a pencil. We're going to, burn our draft card. And like I say, everybody aimed it at the military because the politicians were just too chicken to take the blame themselves. Mm-hmm. And if this makes national headlines, I'm welcome with it. I'm happy, And it's a shame. It really is a shame. But good for us for welcoming them home, the veterans today from Afghanistan and Iraq.
Okay.
If I sound bitter, I am.
What's that?
If I sound bitter, I am.
Well, that's understandable.
But I'm happy to be bitter. It doesn't bother me a bit.
Okay. What about your family? How were you received by your family when you got home?
I don't want to talk about that. It was good. It chokes me up.
Oh, okay, understandable. Now, after you did your deployment, how many years did you have in?
I had, went in November of 68, got back in the summer of 72, so I had going on 4 years.
4 years.
And I don't. My family was great. It just chokes me up.
No, that's understandable. So how you decided to stay in after?
No, I didn't.
You didn't? Okay.
I decided to get out.
Oh, okay.
I had been in what's called Tactical Air Command, which is, people see themselves as fighter pilots. I'd been through Incident Fighter Pilot School, and I had been promised if I went to Vietnam, and I volunteered to go to Vietnam, as a volunteer, I would come back in a fighter. And I came back to a B-52, which is just the complete opposite of a fighter. And it really ticked me off. I actually offered to stay in Vietnam for 6 months longer if I could get out of the B-52 assignment, and they wouldn't let me do it. So I got back, and I walked into that assignment with a bad attitude. The only good thing about it was I got to write Pat, because I thought I can get back here and I can start looking around for a job. And I actually put my papers in to get out of the Air Force. And I was going to go to UD and then go into the FBI. Seemed like a good plan. They were only hiring at that time accountants and lawyers, and I was going to go to law school, and I think I took or was going to take the LSAT. It's been a long time. And my boss from Vietnam was at the Air Force Military Personnel Center. Good guy to have. And he saw my paperwork go through, and he called me up and he said, "I thought you liked the Air Force." And I said, "I love the Air Force, but I'm not driving this truck the rest of my life." I went from being by myself and being able to turn upside down and go look at things on the ground, and to being in there with half the city population in the airplane with me, and at 12 hours and 15 minutes and 35 seconds you had to be over this point at this altitude going this fast, and I just didn't like that. That's not, and they had alert, which is like being in jail, waiting for the klaxon to go off to go bomb Russia or wherever we were going to bomb. A week at a time you were locked up in the alert facility, because Wright Pat's not a SAC base. You were pretty much restricted to the area over there. So that's not what I wanted to do. But he offered me, my boss from Vietnam said, what if I could get you out of that? And I said, well, I'd rethink it, because I really liked the Air Force. I really did. And he, long story short, he got me a T-37 to Reese Air Force Base. And I've got a teaching degree, and I wanted to be an instructor pilot, so worked out great. Ended up staying in for another 17 years. No, I was in for 23, so I was 4, so another 19 years.
Did your experience coming back from Vietnam affect your decision to think, before you were thinking about getting out? Was that part of your decision there? Or was
No,
it just because
I figured those people are idiots. Screw them, let them rot. To this day, I still think the same thing. But I'm not bitter much. But it had nothing to do with it. It was just a matter of what they had put me into. If they'd put me into a fighter, I'd have been happy to stay, or a trainer, something that you're pretty much by yourself, or at least with a student, and that was it. I just don't need I don't need a whole bunch of people on the airplane with me.
Right. Okay. So you did 17 more years, and when did you finally decided to get out? What was your decision?
Well, we had lived in Texas 5 times, and we had been stationed back here at Wright Pat. My family is from this area, all of them. I was, I think I told you, I'm a 4th generation Tip Cityan from Tip City, Ohio. And it was just getting time to get out. My daughter was 5, and she had moved 5 times. And I didn't want to do that to her. Before she started school, I wanted to call it quits. So we moved back here to see, my wife's also from Ohio, and we had never been around relatives before. And my kids had never been around relatives, and they liked it. Karen got a job teaching here in Tip. We had a house, So when it came time to promote, move, whatever, I just made the decision that it was my turn to take one for the team. And as much as I like the Air Force, and I did, I love the Air Force. To this day, I'd go back in if they let me and let me stay here. I just decided it was my time to do something. And I got out, and Karen was able to stay here and teach and retire, and the kids were able to go through school there in Tip City, and it was just time to do it. As much as I hated to get out, it was just time to do it.
Okay. Are you, since getting out, are you a member of any veterans organizations?
Yeah, all of them.
VFW,
VFW, American Legion, not AMVETS, but American Legion, VFW, DAV, Disabled American Veterans, Purple Heart Association, Distinguished Flying Cross Association. I think that's pretty much it.
Okay.
Most of them. Dedalians, it's an order of pilots in the Air, not just the Air Force, but it's professional military pilots.
Okay.
So I've kept my finger in the veterans activities.
Okay. Now, what have you done since separating from the military?
Well, when I retired, I thought I had been an instructor in pilot training. I'd been an instructor at the headquarters Air Training Command. I'd been, as I told you, I'd been different levels at officer training school, and I'd been the professor of aerospace studies at Wright State. So I thought this teaching gig is good. You know, you walk into a room, they come to attention, they call you sir, and they'll memorize anything you want so they get a good assignment. So I tried my hand at teaching high school, and they don't come to attention, and they don't read the books, and I just thought, I don't want to do this.
How long
And
did you do that for?
A semester.
1 semester.
I knew after a day it was a mistake. I got offered a job as the director of the National Aviation Hall of Fame out at that time it was downtown Dayton, and that seemed like a good thing. It was airplanes, and so I took that, and I did that for almost 14 years, and raised some money, built them a building, and did quite well with that. And then I'd always said that I wasn't going to run a museum, so once we got the building built and the exhibits and everything installed, I was thinking about leaving. I told them I was going to leave in 2003, and they were going to find somebody, and one person they hired got cancer and died, so I ended up staying on, and then we wrote a book, this book, and it became I knew a lot of people. I had low friends and high places in this job as the executive director of the National Aviation Hall of Fame, and we had always talked while we were writing this book about, is it possible to welcome home Vietnam veterans? You know, we didn't get a welcome home. Is it too late? And that was one of the things that kind of the book was aimed at. The last words of the book are welcome home. And so I knew some people, particularly out in Las Vegas. We would do what's called a Thunderbird Hangar Party, which is their last show of the year every year out at Nellis Air Force Base. And Nellis and Las Vegas are very, very patriotic cities. And we pitched the idea of an Operation Welcome Home to them, and they in fact said, yeah, we'd love to do it. We'd love to do it in 2005. And they offered us a lot of support from the casinos and the Chamber of Commerce and Fremont Street and a lot of other people. And they said that they would do it if I was a national chairman. And by the way, they, not another guy that we were working with, said, we can't pay you. And I said, well, that sounds like a deal. So I quit my job at the Hall of Fame and became the national chairman of Operation Welcome Home. And it was supposed to be a one-time only shot to welcome home all the Vietnam veterans and give them the welcome home that they never had. And it was fantastic. We worked on that for a year, a lot of it on our own money, and all of the proceeds from this book, which as I understand it was 4 printings, and now it's out in softback, even now 10 years later, all of those proceeds went to help fund the Operation Welcome Home so we could travel around the country and promote it and things like that. And it was fantastic. We had it at Veterans Day weekend of 2005. We had 4 days of solid activities. It was free. Everything was free. We had a fantastic parade that had 20 deep on either side of the street cheering us on. And the parade grew because a lot of these guys were a little leery of being in a parade because their last experience with being recognized as Vietnam veterans was to be insulted and yelled at. And as the parade went on, we would see people on the sidelines that had Vietnam veteran hats or whatever, and we pulled them out. And so the parade kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And at the end, Oscar Goodman, who's just fantastic, he was the mayor of Las Vegas at the time, shook hands with every veteran. We had flyovers. We had skywriters writing "We Heart Vietnam Veterans," and we had an air show at Nellis Air Force Base that was dedicated to Vietnam veterans, and there's a lot of Vietnam airplanes and things like that. And Anne Margaret, bless her little heart, you see the things on the internet about Anne Margaret and how she does things for veterans. And I don't believe a lot of what I see on the internet, but that's true. Anne Margaret made an appearance, did her 1964, 68 show she did with Bob Hope, did part of that, and didn't charge us a thing. Did it all free. Didn't pay for travel, didn't pay for anything. I mean, she just did it because she values the Vietnam veterans. And we Indians, Native Americans put on a Native American powwow on a football field. And it's really Fremont Street, turned the whole street over to Vietnam veterans, and all of the stages along Fremont Street were, we did a thing out there, and some other people did, and they redid their dome that they have that goes down the street that's a light show to honor Vietnam veterans. So that was supposed to be it. And then about 2 months later, we got a bunch of thank yous and somebody saying that we want to do one in California. So we did another national one in California the next year. And by that point, the Korean War veterans had come to us and said, nobody welcomed us home either. It's Forgotten War. And nobody insulted us, but nobody welcomed us home. So we said, come on board, and we changed the logo for the event. This was the original logo, was the Vietnam Service Medal. For that one, we put the Korean War Service Medal underneath it. Well, by the time we had done the third national one, we had also had, we figure about 4 dozen, nobody knows for sure, local and regional ones that asked if they could do it, use our logo, and we set up a template on a website for how to do it, how to publicize it, how to get people to participate, how to get sponsors. And we went to some of them, but not all of them. And by the time this was all over, by the time we had one in Indiana in, I think it was '09, a national one, we had basically invited all veterans to it, because we had guys that had been, World War II guys. They were welcome home, but they're always welcome. And then we had Desert Storm guys. We had Cold War guys, and I'd never thought of this because I was a Cold War guy for part of my career, who had been in missile silos or had been on the Fulda Gap in Germany or a tripwire in Korea, and people die in those places. And so we said, it's for everybody. And we kept the Vietnam logo because that was what it was about. That's how it started. But by the time we had our last one we had one in Dayton, and we also had one in Indiana that was pretty good. It was open just pretty much to everybody. And at some point, they changed the logo or the book cover to say the book that inspired Operation Welcome Home. That's probably one of the neatest things I ever did. I mean, as far as, we didn't make any money on the book, but what a neat thing to be able to do. Yeah. All these guys that didn't get welcomed home finally got welcomed home. That was very cool. Yeah. Cool. So that's what we do.
And you're still doing that?
We're doing it, but not quite as much. What happened about 2 or 3 years ago, and that would have been 2011, 2012, is what we were finding was people still wanted to do the Operation Welcome Homes, but because, and this is a good thing, because of the way they embraced the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, it was turning into as much an Iraq and Afghanistan thing as it was a Vietnam thing. And we were kind of getting lost in the shuffle. So we just kind of gave them our blessing and said, if you want to use the logo, go ahead. Plus at that point, we've been doing it for 10 years. So we just kind of, at some point, you got to kind of step back and let somebody else take it over. So they have, and a lot of really neat things have come out of that that's way, way above and beyond what we ever had imagined. But we kind of just stepped out of the side. But it all started when I was at the Hall of Fame, and when I was down working at the convention center before we had our own building, I used to see people on the street that were obviously veterans. They were wearing fatigue jackets and things like that, and they were begging for food. And I actually got some of them some food. I never gave them the money. I'd go get some food someplace and give it to them. And then talking to them, they couldn't even fill out a resume. You know, you talk to them about applying for a job. They don't have a phone number. They don't have an address. And so I started working with them just one-on-one, and that kind of led into the whole veterans thing that we did later on, and that was how I got inducted into the Ohio Veterans Hall of Fame back in '97. That was just one-on-one kind of things. But this was just fantastic. This was a national thing. We were on national TV, and Paul Harvey mentioned us, and you don't even know who Paul Harvey is, do you?
Yeah. Heard the name.
Oh. He mentioned us on his radio broadcast. We did an episode. We actually were in person with G. Gordon Liddy, who, do you know him?
G. Gordon Liddy. No,
His claim to fame is Watergate, but he is actually a very big patriot.
Oh, okay. The reporter.
Yeah, kind of. He had us on his show talking about it, and then he called us up because we started, in addition to doing this, we started a veterans organization called the American Veterans Institute. And what we did was try to help veterans get their benefits that had been denied or delayed by the VA, which is, you're seeing how that works. We identified that problem a long time ago. But we did it all free, and we'd help them, you know, negotiate the paperwork and things like that. So when you talk about what I did after the Hall of Fame, I guess it was pretty much just volunteering to help veterans out. There was no pay or anything like that involved. So I've been unemployed, I guess, is another way to look at it.
All right. So we'll kind of taper off to some reflections. Is there anything else about your military or post-military experience that you wanted to, any stories you'd like to add?
I've got lots of stories, but I don't think you get enough video camera space. My daughter just last week received her honorable discharge from the Air Force Reserve. She went to Notre Dame on an Air Force ROTC scholarship, and then after she got out, she stayed in the reserves. But with 3 kids, I think she decided to call it quits. So the tradition continues.
Yeah.
So, but it's been fun. I love the Air Force, love the military. Any GI is a good guy or a good girl, because when I started, the military, the Air Force, was less than 5% female, and now it's 20+%, I think, is where they're at, and that's a good thing.
Okay. How has your wartime experience in Vietnam, how did that affect your life, do you think?
Well, I can't move my arms in certain directions, so there's been a physical thing. Hopefully there's not been a psychological thing, but there probably has been. I don't think anybody can go through a war, whether it's you or anybody else, without being affected in some way or shape or form. But I think sometimes you're too close to recognize that there was an effect to it. I'm sure there was, but physically there was. And the fact that I didn't get it treated the way I should have when I had it done, and continued to fly with a 5-pound helmet on my head, pulling sometimes 4 or 5 Gs, probably didn't do my neck any good. So I've got some lingering stuff, but the government pays me to keep my mouth shut, so I guess it's okay.
All right.
That only took 10 years, by the way.
What's that?
The VA case I did with those guys.
For your disability?
Yeah, but we're seeing all of that in the news today.
Do you think, I mean, from your personal experience with the VA, do you think that the scrutiny they're coming under right now is...
I think it's way overdue.
Yeah.
I think that, my personal opinion, I don't know if this is the venue for it, but why in the heck are we paying anybody in civil service? And I'll get calls if this ever gets on the air, and I don't care. I don't remember my dad or my 3 brothers that were civil service, or my mom or my sister that were civil service. I don't remember anybody talking about bonuses. And I think that's where a lot of these problems come from, is bonuses. Why? You know, anybody else that's got a job doesn't get a bonus. My wife taught school for 20-something years. She never got a bonus. She may have gotten donuts from the principal, but why do we pay people that are getting a salary a bonus? That's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that, honestly, do we really need a VA medical system? My experience with it is no. Now, I know a lot of people that like it. I don't particularly care for it, and you know, you figure there's at least 1,700 VA medical facilities, from what I understand. That's what they say on the CBS Evening News.
Mm-hmm.
How much does it cost just to mow the grass in those 1,700 facilities? How much does it cost to keep the HVAC systems running? How much does it cost to mop the floors? The money that's used for overhead on all of those facilities, you could take just that money and give every veteran a medical card that's good anywhere in the United States, and they could use it just like you do a Medicare card or something like that, instead of having all these separate systems that are just rife with inefficiencies.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my read on it. This has nothing to do with your Veterans History Project, but if you ever do a project on the VA, count me in.
Okay.
You know, that's not going to happen, by the way. Nobody's going to ask either one of us.
Well, we'll never know.
You know, once you get to be president, we'll deal
Yeah.
with it. Remember me when you make it big, right?
I sure will.
Yeah.
What are, besides how it affected you, or any life lessons that you've taken from the military?
Oh, sure.
Applied the rest of your life?
Sure. Life's too short to screw around with the little stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm more outspoken now than I used to be, just because I don't care anymore. You know, this thing about the VA, and a wise man wouldn't say anything, but it's the way I feel, so I'll do it. And I don't think that I would have done that before I went to Vietnam. I think it instilled a certain amount of independence, and it also instilled a certain amount of confidence. I mean, I've taken the best they can throw at me,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm still here. So I think that it did I was relatively quiet before I went to Vietnam. I'm not so much quiet anymore, and I think that that's one of the changes. So there's changes, but it would take somebody outside to tell you what the changes are. Somebody that knew me then and somebody that knows me now,
Right.
to tell you what the changes are. Hopefully they've been okay. I'm sure some of them aren't, but you know, when I got back, I was a very angry guy. You know, it was a typical, probably post-traumatic stress before they knew what it was. But you know, if you got in my way in a car, I was just as likely to try to run you off the road as I was. I'm not like that now. I'm a very calm and rational guy, and I drive slow. But you know, you go through changes, and hopefully you come out the other side and everything's okay.
Okay.
But my hat's off to anybody that does it, because it's not something that you do for a year and then walk away from it. Whether it's a Vietnam veteran, whether it's a World War II veteran, or whether it's a Iraq and Afghanistan veteran. You know, everybody is affected by it, and everybody's affected by it differently, and nobody really knows how they are affected by it. Probably the best thing to do is ask their wives,
Mm-hmm.
or their kids, or somebody like that.
Yeah. Okay. Is there any message you'd like to leave for the future generations that may view this interview?
I have no great words of wisdom. My only message, based on my personal experience, would be honor the veterans that are willing to give their life for you, and show them the respect that hopefully they're due. Are there bad apples in the sure, but by and large, these are people that, I like a saying that there's only two people in the world that are willing to give up their life for you: Jesus Christ and a veteran. Not a military guy. Veteran theoretically is out, but and it's true. You know, they'll go against any odds because they're doing it for their country and the love of their country, and I just hope that's respected by the general population, because we are the 1%. When they talk about the 99%, that was a big thing a couple years ago. The 99%. Well, that's the people that never served in the military. That's the 1% or less that's serving in the military, and they're doing it for the 99%. They're sure not doing it for the pay, that's for sure. When I went into the Air Force, I think I made, with flight pay and my housing allowance and everything else, I think I was making $7,000 a year. Now granted, that was way back, but you don't do it for the pay. You do it for the love of country, and for, you know, hopefully you're contributing to the country's safety and the safety of the people on it. And people need to honor that, so that would be my only message.
Okay. Anything else you wanted to add that we haven't talked about or you'd like to elaborate on?
Not unless you just want to tell jokes.
No.
Don't do that, huh?
Maybe after.
Okay.
Alrighty, well thank you for this video. Thank
Yeah.
you for your service.
And I appreciate the fact you let me to wander off topic a little bit.
That's all right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.